All right, our next case is case number 2023-0432, Mitchell versus Race.
Hello, you absolute legends. This is Billy Mitchell's lawyer, and these are the justices of the Supreme Court of Florida. Billy is trying desperately to stop his ridiculous and frivolous lawsuit against the world's greatest Pac-Man player David Race from being thrown out, and Billy is going to fail. Billy is famous for suing or threatening to sue people who call him a cheater. Everyone already knows this, but defamation lawsuits aren't the only stupid lawsuits he likes to file, and Billy's lawsuit against David Race is arguably his dumbest ever. Billy sued David Race back in April of 2021 because David recorded phone calls between him and Billy. David wasn't recording these calls because he had some evil scheme to expose Billy at some point or for nefarious reasons. He recorded them because he records all of his calls with everyone. David is a resident of Ohio, where you don't need the other person's consent to record your calls. What David did was normal and legal where he lives. In fact, when David recorded these calls, which occurred between 2018 and 2019, David and Billy were friends, and David was a vocal supporter of Billy. But at some point, after reviewing much of the evidence against Billy, David came to the rational conclusion that not only did Billy cheat, but Billy had been lying directly to him and using him as a pawn. After learning the truth that Billy is a conman, David then chose to help Twin Galaxies in their lawsuit against Billy by providing them with a recording of a phone call showing that Billy was the type of person to lie and trick people. Billy was pissed that David was now helping Twin Galaxies. So Billy did what Billy does when he is upset with someone. He sued him. Billy claimed that what David did was illegal because Billy lives in Florida, where you do need consent to record calls. But that's just not how it works. It doesn't matter where Billy lives, it matters where David lives. And where David lives, it's totally legal. And the court agreed. In March of 2023, the appeal court dismissed the lawsuit, literally saying that what David did was legal and that Billy's lawsuit was offensive. But Billy's crusade against David knew no bounds, and he took it all the way to the Supreme Court of Florida, where finally, in November of 2024, they agreed that the lawsuit is to be thrown out for good. Recording a phone call without consent is legal in Ohio. It's important to know this context at the outset, because for the past 3 years, Billy Mitchell has put an innocent man through hell with this vindictive lawsuit. So while many of you obviously accept that suing an innocent person is morally wrong, the full extent of just how bad an action this is won't truly be understood by many people. And I do hope that Billy's actions result in him being further ostracized from the gaming community. Because he didn't just sue anyone, he sued the best Pac-Man player ever. Billy always claims that he wants to champion video game competition, and that he is some shining beacon for the community, like he says in this clip here.
If I have achieved all that I could in the gaming world, I need to now push and advocate for competitive gaming, the players, the notoriety, the recognition, and all that they deserve.
But ironically, he is literally the worst thing to ever happen to video game high school competition. I mean, just his cheating alone would have been bad enough to solidify him as one of the most destructive figures in gaming history. But to go after so many fellow gamers who rightfully call out his cheating is even worse. Billy clearly does not care about the gaming community, because his actions towards other gamers are just evil. When you sue someone, one of the first things the court must establish is if it even has personal jurisdiction over the defendant. In this case, Billy, a Florida resident, sued David, an Ohio resident, and he sued him in a Florida court. And it's up to Billy to argue why Florida can dictate what laws David should obey. The reality in this case is that Florida doesn't have jurisdiction over David. If David owned property in Florida or conducted business in Florida, it would be different. But neither of these things are true. David really doesn't have any contact with Florida at all. The only contact he had with Florida is the fact that he occasionally spoke with Billy, and Billy lives there. But just having conversations with people who live in a particular state isn't enough to give that state jurisdiction over you. And this is why in March of 2023, the District Court of Appeal dismissed the lawsuit. And in their opinion, they made it very clear that what David did was perfectly legal, and that any action brought against him in Florida would be unjust. They said, "It is significant that the conduct that offends the Florida plaintiff, the recording of phone calls without his consent, is not illegal in Ohio, where the calls were recorded. The recording of the calls is not malum in se, a wrong or evil in itself that is prohibited everywhere. Where a defendant legally records a phone conversation in his home state and has no other significant contacts with Florida, it offends traditional notions of fair play and substantial justice to require him to appear in Florida to defend against a lawsuit for an alleged violation of the Florida Security of Communications Act. We therefore reverse and remand to the Circuit Court with directions to enter an order dismissing the case for lack of personal jurisdiction. This opinion was written by Judge Gross and was signed off on by the Chief Judge Mark Klingensmith. Now, you would think that having the Chief Judge of the District Court of Appeal tell you that this lawsuit is offensive would perhaps give Billy some pause to reflect and reconsider his legal vendetta. But no, he continued pushing and took it all the way to the Supreme Court of Florida. In May of 2024, Billy's lawyer stood in front of the justices and tried to argue that Florida should have jurisdiction, but his arguments were bizarre. For example, one of his arguments related to the fact that David posted on his Facebook account that it was illegal to record calls without consent in Florida. And because David knew it was illegal in Florida, this is supposed to mean that he shouldn't have done it in Ohio.
Correct.
So, I understand that there's a sense in which this is some murky thing about where is the conversation occurring and everything, but if the whole point of all this personal jurisdiction stuff is to focus on what the defendant is doing and the connection between what the defendant does and the form. I mean, everything the defendant did, the recording, the speaking, I mean, it was all in Ohio. In what state was he in?
Ohio. Yeah, that is correct. He was physically located in Ohio, according to his affidavit. If I can take 1 second, Justice, you raised a point about whether or not the defendant knew my client was in Florida. He did subsequently post on Facebook that he went to justia.com and copied Florida statutes for the Chapter 934 and copied it on there and said, it is illegal in Florida to record a phone call unless all parties give consent. I'm paraphrasing.
I have questions about that as well, but I think if you could answer the Chief's question. Then.
This argument is of course irrelevant, because David lives in Ohio, and was in Ohio at the time. But this is just what Billy's lawyers love to do. They throw out nonsensical arguments hoping to confuse the situation. Billy's lawyer honestly looked like a bumbling buffoon when he was trying to explain why Florida should have jurisdiction.
All right. The answer is yes, he was located in Ohio at the time, but for the purposes of committing a tort in Florida under the long-arm statute, if an intercept, and there's no reason to depart from Mozo in this particular instance, since intercept means that he intercepted the call, let's write that, since the law is such that where my client spoke means that the call was intercepted in Florida. In other words, under Mozo and under France and under the definitions of oral communication and other definitions in the statutes, basically race intercepted the calls in Florida. It was enough to commit a tortious act in Florida. It is enough to state that the tort as alleged occurred in Florida, which is really all you need for 1B jurisdiction, or 1A2, excuse me. So.
In the end, the justices were not convinced, and ended up discharging jurisdiction, which means they didn't make a decision either way, and accepted the decision made by the District Court of Appeal. The Supreme Court opinion stated, "In the end, while this case presents many interesting issues, we conclude those issues are largely academic in the context of the unique procedural history of this case. As a result, we exercise our discretion, discharge jurisdiction, and dismiss this proceeding." And that's it. It's over. After 3.5 years, David Reyes has finally won for good. For the past 3 years, I have heard Billy claim over and over that David illegally recorded his calls. He even declared this in his other lawsuits.
Why are you suing Mr. Reyes?
I'm suing him because he illegally recorded 27 phone calls between he and I.
But this was never true. It was always a lie. Perhaps now Billy will stop repeating this lie, but I'm really not getting my hopes up. Billy will of course try to sweep this under the rug, just like he always does when he loses a lawsuit. Don't expect an apology from Billy or an admission that this lawsuit was wrongly filed. In fact, if Billy had his way, he would never comment on this again, and everyone would simply forget it ever happened. That's what Billy wants. But I'm sorry, I just can't let that happen.